the flickering light of Asia, or the Assyrian nation and church. The total number of the Assyrian population in Urmia has been variously estimated. The Persian authorities nowhere in the kingdom have ever taken any census of the people. Consequently, the number of the Assyrians was listed in accordance with the number of their villages and the number of their families in each village. These Christian communities registered each from 25 to 250 families. As a rule, the Assyrian families are large, and the common rule of allotting an average of 5 members to each family cannot be applied in their case, in order to secure an approximate estimate of their total number. Some have figured this number at 56,000 and others at 82,000, exclusive of Todgaver and Modgaver population, to be therefore on the conservative side, and to include also the Persian Assyrians of the latter two districts. We may safely ascribe to them a total sum of 70,000 people. Of this population, about 25,000 souls arrived in the mission buildings in the city, and the rest are yet to be accounted for, with the exception of those who deserted their homes and accompanied the retreating Russian soldiers. Some of the American mission buildings destroyed by the Muslims, courtesy Near East Relief. Rev. John Shedd, Dean, American Mission and American Vice Consul in Urmia, Persia. He died as a martyr for the cause of Christ during the last exodus of the Assyrians from Urmia, by courtesy Near East Relief. 25,000 souls who had experienced all manner of cruelties and all manner of insults at the hand of their relentless pursuers, and who were deprived of everything they possessed, had now found refuge beneath a flag. The glorious principles for which it stood were destined to inspire and awaken all nations of the earth. 25,000 souls, almost a duplicate number of the hungry multitude which elicited the divine compassion of Christ, and which was fed by a miracle that has inspired love and adoration in the hearts of million souls throughout the long centuries of the Christian era. In the place of those fishermen of Galilee were now a band of the American missionaries. There was no Christ now to break and multiply the loaves and the fishes, whence the bread to feed the hungry throngs. It was a tremendous task, and with its staggering problem, it rested in full weight upon the shoulders of these successors of the early apostles. For aside from the problem of food, there was also the problem of housing and sanitation, the problem of medical service, the problem of giving the people the protection they had sought from the infuriated mobs of a maddened Islam. In this modern apostolic band, there was a man of God who, like his saintly father, was born to be a leader among his associates. This man was Dr. William Shedd, the son of his predecessors, Dr. and Mrs. John Shedd, whose love and devotion to the cause of Christ have to the present day left among the Assyrians a savor of life unto life. Dr. William Shedd was particularly blessed of God, for in addition to his sincerity, devotion, and intellectual gifts, he possessed a remarkable wisdom, the need of which was particularly felt just at this hour of great emergency. It was providential that at this time he acted also in the capacity of the American Vice Consul. Brave and courageous by nature as he was, his consular position gave him additional strength to be commanding and deal firmly with the Mohammedan authorities. The work of the housing refugees was taken up first. The mission quarters were entirely too small to accommodate such throngs. There was an abundance of Christian homes to be had in the immediate vicinity of the mission compass, wherein the people could be made comfortable, but no one would venture to move a step further from the shelter and the protection of the American flag. Furthermore, the Kurdish hordes, who had hardly found any plunder left for them in the devastated villages, had now entered the city and had mingled with their native co-religionists in search of additional blood and prey. Therefore, terrible as the congestion of the refugees was, it was deemed safer to let them stay where they were. The Turks also soon arrived, and all communications with the outside world stopped. But even if the postal service had remained unobstructed, checks and banknotes had come now to be of no value, and the mission funds were entirely too small to cope with the situation. Dr. William Shedd came to the rescue. He kept in touch with the moneyed Muslims and borrowed freely of them. they had implicit confidence in him. And in addition to that confidence, the very high rate of interest promised on the loan was, of course, not a small allurement to the lender. There was still another motive which led the Muslim bankers to lend freely to the American missions. It was the fear of the Turks. They did not know but that the invaders might search and collect all gold and silver. It was a day of lawlessness, a day of do as you please. They thus feared and delivered their cash with high interest into the only hands they could have trusted. But whence the source of this trust? What was the ground for this confidence? Surely, in the last analysis, it was not a trust in the riches of America, nor so much in the government of the United States. They trusted in the principles and the ethics, that very Christianity they were now so ruthlessly seeking, so eradicate from their midst. How blind have been the sons of men in all ages, how enslaving the power of superstition when it has once bound its victims with its chains, how deliberate and determined the rebellion of human heart, in refusing to acknowledge the truth, and in choosing to continue in sin and degradation. This, too, against the persuasive influences of the clear light it beholds. In the day of judgment it will surely be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah than for these faithful adherents of Islam, who had repeatedly witnessed the superiority of Christ's teachings over the vagaries of the wild fancies of their own empty religion. But it has always been so, and it will always remain so, till the divine author of Christianity returns to chain Satan, the great slaveholder of the human race, at his glorious advent the second time, when with the chaining of the arch-enemy will also be eradicated forever all those evil and sinful influences which have led the families of mankind to reject the saving light they see, and choose to remain in sin and total darkness. Ruins of the American compound, where the Persian Assyrians were sheltered during the invasion of the land by the Turks. Through the funds thus obtained, arrangement was made with the Muslim bankers of the city to supply daily a needed quantity of bread for the besieged refugees. The bakers agreed, but how deep-rooted was the hatred of Islam, how merciless its schemes for the extermination of the Christians. They conceived the fiendish idea of mixing around glass and large quantities of plaster with the bread, and as a result the entire compass became a vast hospital. Dysentery made a havoc among the people, and before it was through with its appalling toll, a new epidemic set in. The space was so limited, and the people so crowded together, that it was impossible for them to stretch their arms and feet. They slept as they sat down, compressed together like sardines. More than 2,000 people were crowded together day and night within the walls of a small church edifice situated on the campus of the missionary grounds. It was impossible to apply any rules of sanitation. Typhus broke out as if to thin down the densely crowded rooms. It raged so frightfully that the toll of its victims soared up to 80 and 100 a day. And all this while, the maddened mobs were attempting daily to break through and totally destroy the rapidly dwindling multitude. They were held back only by sight of that flag, and by the appearance of the devoted sentry, in the person of Mr. Miller, another American missionary, who stood as a faithful watchman at the gates and often at the risk of his own life. During the siege of the Persian Assyrians within the compound of the American mission buildings, epidemics broke out among the refugees. From 50 to 100 were buried every day, courtesy near East Relief. The medical service also was inadequate to cope with the situation. With Dr. Packard, an American missionary, there were some 17 Assyrian physicians. Of this number, 2 native physicians died, and 6 or 8 were incapacitated by the same epidemic. Dr. Packard, with 1 or 2 assistants, attended the sick and the dying in the American College, buildings situated among 2 miles further west of the city. The other 4 physicians had their hands full day and night amid the indescribable agonies of a large number of the victims. The epidemic spared none. Of 18 members of the American missionary group, 12 of them were stricken down by typhus and 2 died. Disaster and sorrow always brings out the best that is in men. The affliction of the Assyrians disclosed some sterling qualities of these missionaries, which were never known before. The wives of the missionaries, as well as the unmarried missionary women workers, most heroically plunged into a whirlpool of disease and death, freely administered to the wants of their wretched guests, and by doing so they themselves suffered as well. American College of Urmia, the only building left intact after the exodus of the Assyrians, left standing because it was made the headquarters of the Kurdish chief Simku, by courtesy Presbyterian Board of Foreign Missions. With the arrival of the Turkish army, the Persian Muslim disorders ceased to some extent, but only to be followed by the inauguration of a new form of oppression and by a series of fearful executions at the hands of the invaders themselves. The American flag, which remained always floating day and night over the refugees' camp, was a thorn in the flesh of the Turks. It could not be violated, of course, but then, while the Turkish officers had received excellent European education and are perhaps the most modern element within the vast confines of Islam, the Tartar greed has never deserted them, and as to their ferocity, they belong to the age of the Tartar Khans. By the aid of native Mussulmans, they made out a list of the prominent Assyrians and sought their apprehension. By military warrants and under pretense of investigating their records, they removed them from their places of refuge and kept them as prisoners of the war in Turkish barracks. They subjected their victims to all manners of cruelty. They took them out of prison nearly every day and for a number of days. On every occasion, they told their victims that they were being let out to be shot, but after leading them a certain distance, they would bring them back again to suffer more cruelties at their hands. They had a motive for doing so. They demanded a ransom, but they might just as well have tried to draw blood out of a rock. The refugee captives had absolutely nothing left. They, together with all the Assyrians, had already lost all their possessions. A new task developed, and its attendant responsibility fell again upon the weary shoulders of that saintly and untiring missionary, Dr. William Shedd. He was apprised of the situation, and he immediately negotiated with the Turkish officers to settle the purchase price of the victims. With borrowed money, several of the prisoners were rescued. The price was regulated, not by the nature of the offense, for no offense had been committed by these men, but rather by the importance and also by an estimate of the previous riches of the individuals. The ransom price ranged from 3,000 to a maximum of 6,000 each, a minimum. A great majority of these prisoners could not be released under any circumstances. Their doom had been sealed. They were to be shot. Among the latter was Bishop Dinha of the Nestorian Church. The gems of the divine love reveal their luster in such hours of darkness. It has always taken a black night like this to bring to the view the satellites of grace. How narrow our conception of God's all-embracing love. How bigoted those sectarian fences which have always excluded immeasurably more than what they have included within their limited bounds. And how supremely happy the knowledge of the fact that God has not confined his precious stones or his witnesses to within the boundaries of one clime, or of one land, or of one nation. The beauty of the new song in glory shall appear through the grace of the cross in those queer syllables, which have given birth to the dialects of all nations of the earth. Here in the ancient city of Tabarma, the scene of many previous martyrdoms, a Nestorian bishop is being led to be executed. He was not alone. He had a large company of his Christian brethren with him. What Marshamun Barsabe, the first Nestorian patriarch, had done during the persecution of Shapuru the Magi in the 8th century was now to be gloriously repeated by another bishop of his church in the 20th century. Mrs. John Shedd, who as a saintly wife of the American College president did perhaps more for the spiritual uplift of the students than any other missionary, a more consecrated pair than Dr. and Mrs. John Shedd, I doubt if any mission field has ever seen. The Muslims had established a rule in asking of their victims to deny Christ and embarrass Mohammedanism in order to save their lives. but weaker men and women than this body of the prisoners had already chosen to be burned alive, and to be cut to pieces with axes than deny their Redeemer. Be brave, take courage, be patient, falter not, be firm, and look up. In a few moments we shall be with Christ. With such words he continued to encourage his companions in bonds, till they reached the end of their fatal journey, where they were all shot to death. It would have been a pity if we had lost this testimony. Providence saved it for our joy and our edification through the intervention of the falling darkness. With the first volley of shots, all the victims had fallen, but 2 of them had escaped mortal wounds. They laid motionless in the heap of the dead bodies till the executioners had departed. Cautiously, and under the cover of the night, they rose up and made their way to the American College, where they were admitted as if by a miracle, and their wounds were immediately attended to.